Hello there, John Cuturillo here, the life coach of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today I'm going to be diverging from the usual social science discussions and talking about best business and ethical practice in the helping professions for counsellors, psychologists, social workers, life coaches and similar. Now, as per usual, I'm not a professional advisor in this particular area, so please conduct your own research and get professional advice before making decisions about best business practice. But today I'm going to be providing some perspectives on what I believe to be best practice and hopefully instigating some discussion and prompting some people to look into their own business practices and to seek advice on how they can best serve their clients. The first tip I'm going to give is to always obtain a written service agreement. Now, this should ideally go without saying nowadays, but I've heard some discussions amongst helping professionals in which people, even people significantly more experienced than myself, claim that verbal consent is fine. In instances in which you have to deliver services to someone, for example, when you're starting a working relationship with a client, we can safely say that most clients are honest and will honour any agreement that they make with us that is verbal. And I'd like to think most helping practitioners are also honest and will honour any verbal agreements that they make with their clients. But there's no reason not to have a written services agreement with every client. Some people say when people are faced with a written contract, it can make the process intimidating. Yes, especially if it's written in legal language, it can be intimidating, but you are doing yourself, your business, and your clients a massive disservice by not having a document to which both of you can refer should there be a problem in the relationship or if there should be a misunderstanding between the terms to which both parties actually agreed. Most of the time, a client only has to sign the contract once, which means that once that burden is done, both parties can continue in their relationship without too much extra burden in that regard. But that minor inconvenience at the start is worthwhile if it can potentially prevent problems in the relationship later. I would also argue that there's no reason to be using paper contracts anymore, unless somebody doesn't have access to a computer, which in rare cases might be so. Most people have access to a smartphone or a tablet or a personal computer on which they can sign documents electronically. And there are online electronic signature services that allow a person to send a document to another and for that person to then sign the document either on their personal computer or using the touch screen on a smart device. And that's particularly useful because it allows them to draw their actual signature with their finger or with a stylus. And these services will be designed to be secure and reliable. And so by doing that, not only do you save on physical resources, it also allows the client to sign the contract before they enter the first appointment with you, so that when they enter that appointment, they don't have to spend time reading the contract, they're ready to start. Now, reiterating main points of that contract in speaking is fine, just to remind the client of those terms, but the main terms of the agreement should be specified in writing and it should be signed so that both parties can refer to it at a later time should that be necessary. There is no reason in this day and age not to be obtaining written consent. The next tip I'll provide is on proper invoicing. Now, as helping practitioners, we may be mainly focused on the actual substance of our business, what we provide to our clients, being the best helpers that we possibly can be. However, it is also necessary for us to take care of business affairs to make sure that our records and our processes are sound and compliant with the law, and especially for tax purposes. I have seen some helping professionals just asking clients to deposit money into their bank accounts prior to each appointment. This is not good practice. Now, I'm not a financial advisor or an accountant by any means, but the basics of invoicing are that every time you are expecting someone to pay you something, you must issue a tax invoice. Now, that tax invoice must include your Australian business number, which you need if you're running a business in Australia, your business details, the words tax invoice stated on the actual document. It must be clear that that's its purpose. For each service that you're providing, you must list them separately and provide the price for each service, both before GST and the amount of GST, and then the total of the entire invoice. And then each time that person pays you either part of that amount owing or all of that amount owing, you should be sending them an updated invoice that shows the amount paid and the amount still owing. That way your records are sound for tax purposes and the client also has written evidence of what they've paid. The next tip I'll give is on proper record keeping. Now, I've seen some rather controversial statements and suggestions made about record keeping in this field, so this is what I believe to be best practice. When I'm with my clients, I will always be writing case notes as I go with them with my clipboard and notepad. And then I type these into comprehensive case notes after every session that I store securely using an appropriate process. I've seen a number of helping professionals not use a clipboard and simply just listen and converse with their clients while they're working. Or I've had some helping professionals not keep proper case notes. They keep case notes that are practically indecipherable to anyone else, and I've actually heard some people admit that that's how they write their case notes. The problem with this is most people's recall, including your own if you're a helping professional, isn't going to be sufficiently good for you to be able to recall the minutiae of the details that the client gives you and be able to reproduce it in writing later. And that's not a slight on you. You can't be expected to have a memory that's that good. But the problem is that if you decide not to write as you're speaking to the client and then go to type the case notes later, the likelihood is that your mind is not going to remember all the important details, and you may even distort or misinterpret some. I have actually seen psychologists do that. I've actually witnessed case notes written by psychologists that are actually factually incorrect because they weren't properly taking notes as they were talking to the client. Also, if those notes are needed at a later date, for example, if the client needs a record of what was discussed, or one of their other treating practitioners does, or in the event that your notes are subpoenaed by the legal system because the client or another person related to is involved in some kind of legal proceedings and they need written evidence from people who are working with the client, what's the guarantee that you're going to be able to interpret incomplete case notes and be able to fill the details absolutely accurately to the extent that you'd be expected to? Or if you have to transmit them at short notice, who's to say you're going to be able to have the time to write full case notes so that the receiving person can understand them? I actually find that writing with my hands is actually a better process neurologically for me than typing because it allows me to be more fully engaged with the client. I actually process what they're saying to me more effectively when I'm actually actively writing. Now, an argument I've heard against this is, but if you're writing notes on a notepad, how can you make eye contact all the time? Okay, I'm going to discuss this in a future episode, but let me provide this to you in brief. The human mind does not necessarily interpret messages or gestures in isolation. Okay, that means that just because somebody is not making eye contact with you occasionally does not mean that you're automatically going to assume that that person is not listening to you. The human mind also takes into account context when it interprets a particular event in the environment, which means that if I, as a practitioner, am writing notes as I'm talking to the client and my responses to them and my body language indicate that I'm listening and that I've actually properly interpreted what they're saying, they're not going to think that I'm not listening to them. I'm going to be able to still build effective rapport. And as a case in point, throughout my career in the helping professions, I have used a notepad and my clients have consistently attested that I do listen to them and that I am responsive to them, that I actually take into account what they say to me. As a matter of fact, I would argue that most clients would even find it understandable that you would want to write as you're talking to them so as not to forget or misinterpret everything. And I would argue most clients actually appreciate that. So as long as you're looking up from your notepad occasionally and making it obvious otherwise that you're listening to that person, it shouldn't interfere with the rapport. Now, adding to some of the previous ideas that I've mentioned, it is absolutely essential to use a proper case management package. Now, I'm speaking specifically to life coaches on this particular point because some may not consider just how serious it is when you're working with a client who has vulnerabilities and is giving you sensitive information. And my intuition is a lot of coaches may not take seriously the careful storing of that information. If you are a helping professional in Australia, whether it be a medical professional, whether it be a licensed professional or an unlicensed professional like a life coach, it is absolutely essential that the way you're storing your client's data is in line with the Australian Privacy Act and the Australian privacy principles that are enshrined in it. I would argue that the best practice is to always use a case management package specifically designed for medical or legal professionals in Australia, something with the highest standard of security and encryption, so that you have the reassurance and your clients have the reassurance that the data are as secure as they can be expected to be in an electronic environment. And what's good is that any such package should be able to store securely your client's details, your case notes, and also provide invoicing function as well, so you don't need a separate program for that. Some even have separate facilities or add-ons that allow you to send electronic documents for signing and possibly even for video conferencing as well. Conduct research and choose a case management package that is going to allow you to store your client's data securely and in line with Australian law. Now, on that note, I'm not going to insult any particular service and I'm not going to say that your reasons for using it are necessarily invalid. I'm not sponsored by any particular service providers at all. I'm simply giving my honest opinion on what's best. But what's popular isn't necessarily what's going to be best for your particular purposes. I'll note two of the tools here that I use in my practice. One of them is ZotoSign. That is an online electronic signature service. There's a limited free plan available if you don't want to pay just yet, and there are also paid plans that offer full functionality. I've found that to be extremely effective in my practice. The other major tool is with regard to video conferencing. Now, there are a number of different video conferencing applications that are available, and again, I'm not going to deride any of them because people have legitimate reasons for using them, and I'm sure they're effective. Personally, I use Whereby. I'm going to link these two tools in the show notes, but what I love about Whereby is that it essentially allows you up to a given number of meeting participants to conduct a meeting of any length that you would need practically in the context of this profession without having to pay. It has a free plan that actually offers substantial functionality. A lot of services in this domain require you to pay for any meeting of considerable length. So far, I've found it to work in most browsers, which is excellent because some video conferencing packages require the person who is a guest in the meeting, in this case the client, even if they don't have to create an account, to download an application onto their device in order to use it. Whereby works straight from the browser, and I've found that it works with any browser I've tried so far. What I've also found about it, and again, this is based on what I've read, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, so this is based only on what I've read, but the location and the way in which they store the data also seem to be notable in comparison to some other packages. So it's also worthwhile, even when doing something as seemingly trivial as choosing a video conferencing package, it's helpful to also consider the security aspect with regard to the organization that develops the application. How are they storing the data? Is the data secure? So in summary, Whereby, for most purposes, it's free and it seems to be a secure package, in my opinion, from what I can judge. Now, the final tip I'm going to give is with regard to insurance. Now, most helping practitioners would know that you need professional indemnity insurance and public liability insurance to indemnify you against any legal action that is brought against you if something that you do is found to be responsible for causing harm to one of your clients or a member of the public. There are two other types of insurance that you should look into because these won't be covered by conventional insurance. The first is cybersecurity insurance, and that is designed to indemnify you in the event that your electronic records are compromised and the data breach causes harm to your clients in some way. For example, via the illegal sale of personal details. A lot of professional indemnity insurance policies won't cover this, and it only takes one claim for your business to be severely damaged. So speak to a broker about getting cybersecurity insurance. Of course, it shouldn't negate you actually taking careful steps to ensure your data is stored securely, but it's never a bad idea to have that extra reassurance as well in the event that their records were ever to be compromised. The next type is statutory liability insurance, and this is to an extent designed to pay fines that you may receive if you inadvertently breach criminal law in the course of your practice. Now again, you should definitely speak to an insurance professional about this area, but it's something that wouldn't be covered by a lot of professional insurance policies. Now again, remember that no insurance policy should be negating your ethical mindset and your striving to do what is in the best interest of the law and the best interest of your clients. However, one also has to be humble enough to admit that mistakes are always possible, and you owe that not just to yourself but also to your clients. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As I said, I'm not a professional in these particular areas. I'm simply giving perspective on what I believe to be best practice. So please speak to a licensed professional about these areas of your practice if you feel you need advice. And also remember that I would love to hear from you if you have ideas on topics to discuss, or if you have any questions for me to answer. Please feel free to contact me. I love to hear from my audience. So until next time, take care.